Every villain needs a lair, a place to sign papers, pace about, yell at minions, and show off in front of other world leaders. But where did Adolf Hitler make his home in Berlin? There are 4 places that I want to show you. They're all right next to each other, and they chart his rise from upstart politician to dictator, and ultimately to his death. I think it's important to start out by saying that I don't think Adolf Hitler ever really saw Berlin as his home. Berlin was this great big industrial city, a lot of workers. It was a very left-wing city. The Nazis never really had great support in the capital, at least in their rise to power. Hitler preferred seclusion, the mountains, and even when it came to Berlin, he preferred these great big ideas of grandeur. It was under Adolf Hitler that the Nazis wanted to completely redesign Berlin. That's not what you do to a place that you love. Still, let's have a look at the places that he did make home when he was here. So the first of Adolf Hitler's 4 homes in Berlin was actually only a temporary one, was a hotel. It was the Hotel Kaiserhof, of which nothing survives today. That's true actually of all 4 of Adolf Hitler's Berlin homes. In a way, the 4th one, we'll see when we get to it. Now, Adolf Hitler moved to Germany in 1913, actually to Munich, to dodge the draft in Austria, where, of course, he was a failed artist. After about 1 year of living in Munich, though, the Great War began, and Adolf Hitler joined the German army and fought in the war, became a corporal, and at the end of the war, instead of going home to his native Austria, went back to Munich, which he now considered his home. And it's in Munich that he fell into politics and became the Adolf Hitler that we know. Now, as the Nazi Party grew, they never really did very well in Berlin. In fact, in the November 1932 election that would bring them to power, they only got about 1/4 of the vote in this city. Top dog at that time here in Berlin was the Communist Party. Already for a couple of years by that point, when Adolf Hitler was in Berlin, he stayed at the Kaiserhof. The Kaiserhof was a grand hotel. It was a place that in the early 1930s really became the nerve center of Nazi power in Berlin, as evidenced by Dr. Joseph Goebbels' memoir released in 1934 titled Vom Kaiserhof zur Reichskanzlei, from the Kaiserhof Hotel to the Reich Chancellery. Now, the Kaiserhof itself was a particularly grand building. It opened in 1875 when it was built as Berlin's first ever luxury hotel. The Kaiserhof was extravagant, lavish, expensive. It's the kind of place where important people stayed. We can't underestimate how important appearances were. It also sent a message. Hitler is powerful and important, but he doesn't have a permanent home here, but he's eyeing one up because, well, this hotel was perfectly situated for anybody who wanted to be in government because it's just around the corner from all of the important government ministries that the Nazis wanted to take control over. And it was on the 30th of January 1933 inside the Kaiserhof Hotel where Adolf Hitler learned that after months of negotiations, he had finally been appointed Chancellor of Germany, democratically. He then made this short trip across the road to the Reich Chancellery building. Small correction. He went over to the Reich President's Palace to be appointed Chancellor, not the Chancellor's office. Of course, it's the President who appoints the Chancellor. Silly me. Where he was sworn in. After that, the Kaiserhof still saw some kind of importance, let's say, in Nazi Germany. On the 28th of March 1933, Joseph Goebbels gave a fiery speech here to representatives from the film industry to tell them how movies were now going to be made under the new regime, how propaganda was going to be made. And still, even during World War II, the Kaiserhof could be used to wine and dine important people. Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov was invited here in November of 1940, as the city was being bombed by the RAF. He, of course, had a meeting here with the Germans, and whatever they agreed to didn't matter because within a few months, Nazi Germany would make a surprise attack on the Soviet Union and invade them. The Kaiserhof Hotel would go on to be completely destroyed in World War II in a November RAF air raid on Berlin, which was the biggest to hit the city at that time. So if you come here to have a look at it today, I don't think you'll be disappointed. I mean, you won't see any of the hotel, but you will be surprised because the land on which the hotel used to sit was in East Berlin, and the communist government of East Germany then handed it over to, of all countries, North Korea, who have quite a large embassy here today. One of these things that's always quite hard to understand around here, though, is just how big the Wilhelmplatz was, because it changed so much in the East Berlin days. If you look at it online now, you'll see it's this tiny little thing behind me here, but actually the Wilhelmplatz used to be really quite large. This building became the Czech embassy in the 1970s. They actually recently vacated it. And then on the other side, you've got these apartments here that were built in the 1980s in East Berlin. Now, both of these structures, former Czech embassy, apartments, the famous Ulrich supermarket where when she was Chancellor, Angela Merkel used to go shopping. That's not a joke. These all used to be the Wilhelmplatz. It used to be a kind of manicured, really rather pretty square. These days, as I say, it's hardly a square at all. And so when you leave the Wilhelmplatz, you then enter the Wilhelmstraße, and it's actually just over here where the Chancellor's office used to be, where Hitler would have made his second home. You wouldn't know it to look at it today, but a grand building called the Palais Schulenburg used to stand here, right on the Wilhelmstraße. When people ask today, you know, what does Downing Street have to say about this? People used to say that about Wilhelmstraße, but yeah, walking around today, I guess you'd have no idea. Now, the Palais Schulenburg was used as the official Chancellor's residence going back to Bismarck's days, meaning that Adolf Hitler was the final German Chancellor to make it his home. But he didn't actually do it right after coming to power because the building was under renovations at that time that wouldn't be finished until the middle of 1934. Even then, after that, as the years went by, Hitler spent less and less time in Berlin and more time in the Obersalzberg, in the mountains surrounded by nature, very far in the south of the country. He even had a mini Reich Chancellery set up down there so that he could rule from there somewhat permanently. As a result, he spent much more time closer to Munich, the birthplace of the movement, than he did in the capital. Berlin was a place that he ruled, not a place that he loved. By the way, before we continue, if you could just scroll down a little bit and hit that thumb and that subscribe button, that would really help. Basically, just so you know how all this stuff works, you need a bunch of subscribers, watch hours, likes, this kind of thing in order to actually make money from YouTube, which is what I would really like to do. I'd love to bring you loads more stories of Berlin, but I can't do it unless you help me. And it's free and easy to do. You can literally do it right now. I'm watching you do it right now. Thank you. Although perhaps the real reason why Hitler didn't spend so much time in the Chancellery building is he simply didn't like it. He complained that it was simply too modest. And so he got his close personal friend and favorite architect, Albert Speer, to design a new Reich Chancellery. And that used to be just over here. In late 1937, Albert Speer was given complete control over the redesign of Berlin, the Welthauptstadt Germania project, of which the new Reich Chancellery was a part. Now, Speer had an almost unlimited budget, and he made use of slave labor from concentration camps, all to make sure that the new Reich Chancellery was built in record time throughout 1938, ready to open in 1939. Nobody can say for sure exactly how many people were literally worked to death to make sure that this was a success. And nobody could call this new building modest. Right here, where today you'll find a Chinese restaurant, there was once an entrance to what was called the Ehrenhof, the Court of Honor. And at the far side of this great big courtyard were two statues designed by the sculptor Arno Breker, one of them representing the party and the other representing the military. So let's try to get an idea of the scale of this building. Remember, it took up the entirety of this street, Vossstraße. Historic buildings had to be demolished to make way for it. At the entrance down on this side, that's where you had the Ehrenhof, the courtyard with the two naked dude statues. After going past them, one would enter the Mosaic Hall, followed by the Round Hall, and then after that, the 150-meter long Marble Hall, which Adolf Hitler was keen to impress upon visitors was exactly twice the length of the Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles. And then following that came Adolf Hitler's office, or private study. So what kind of visitors did he have in there? Well, they included foreign dignitaries like Yosuke Matsuoka, the foreign minister of Japan, like Marshal Pétain of Vichy France, or General Franco of fascist Spain. The Reich Chancellery, again, you can see that there's just so much empty space here where it used to be. The Reich Chancellery would also include private apartments for Hitler where he would live with his not-so-secret partner Eva Braun when she was up in Berlin as well. He would, of course, entertain a lot of German guests here as well. His minions, his henchmen, people like Himmler, Goering, Goebbels, and Speer. After spending the morning walking the halls, barking things at adjutants who were supposed to somehow write this down and turn it into policy, because he didn't actually like sitting and working at that big desk. It was really just for show. He would then sit down for lunch with aforementioned goons and henchmen and bark at them, go into long monologues about how he saw the world, the problems with it, and about how they were supposed to fix it. And you have to remember that the new Reich Chancellery was only the beginning. The Nazis had huge plans for Berlin that would make things like St. Peter's Basilica just look like a garden shed. They even had plans to build an even bigger, newer, better palace for Adolf Hitler once they'd taken over all of Europe. But of course, rather than building a gleaming new capital for Germany, the Nazis would leave this city, this country, and this continent in ruins. In fact, as World War II neared its end, Hitler moved back to Berlin, and he wanted to, of course, spend all of his time in his great big gleaming palace over here. But in reality, he spent most of his time down here, literally down here, in his subterranean bunker. That was especially important on the 3rd of February 1945, when a huge US air raid hit this city, destroying the Reich Chancellery. Hitler even inspected some of the ruins himself. Gone was his third home, the bunker became his fourth. A bunker had already been built beneath the Old Reich Chancellery during renovations in the 1930s, but that was nowhere near strong enough to withstand the kind of bombs that were being dropped by the end of World War II. So, in 1943 to 44, as the war was looking quite bad for Germany, a new bunker was built right next to that one, but much further beneath the ground. The floor plate was about 8 meters beneath the earth, and the ceiling was 3-meter thick steel reinforced concrete. The complex consisted of about 30 rooms, including a private room for Hitler, a study, and a conference room. Crucially, the bunker was self-sufficient. It had its own power generator, water supply, ventilation systems, and communications lines. It was a subterranean headquarters where Hitler could live out his last days under siege, directing the final moments of World War II. Of course, life inside the bunker was the exact opposite to what it had been inside of the Reich Chancellery. Gone were the trappings of power, the lavish surroundings. Instead, Hitler found himself in a cold, damp, and crowded bunker, surrounded by people who were probably losing their minds with fear. Aides, adjutants, generals, all trying to impress him as he fought on against insurmountable odds. Instead of pacing great halls and eating at great big banquets, Adolf Hitler spent his final days screaming at ghosts and waiting to die. Even as Stalin's Red Army invaded Berlin on the 21st of April 1945, Adolf Hitler stayed put here in his bunker. Had he wanted to escape, he had ample time, ample means to do so, but no, he chose to stay here and order around the remnants of German forces, which included the Volkssturm, a people's militia made up of really a lot of old men, and of course the Hitler Youth, young boys. These are the people who would be defending Berlin, outnumbered several to one by the Red Army. And then, of course, you know how it ends. On the 30th of April 1945, as Red Army forces were nearing this location, Adolf Hitler and his recent wife, they got married the day before, decided to take their own lives. They went into Hitler's bedroom and she took cyanide, he took cyanide and shot himself in the head. Adolf Hitler was gone. His body was then taken outside, put into a crater covered in fuel and set on fire. And after that, it gets a little bit mysterious. And don't worry, I'm not one of those conspiracy theory people, not at all. The reason it gets a bit mysterious is the Soviets are the ones who found the remains, and they wanted to throw other people off the scent, keep the idea of Hitler alive as a kind of means of control. They would eventually put his remains inside of a mass grave outside of a city called Magdeburg, but they wouldn't make this public until the 1970s. And at that time, East Germany dug up the remains, burned everything, threw what was left into a small river with no fanfare whatsoever, and told the world that they had rid us of fascism forever, which I have to say is a nice thought, if not entirely the truth as it would look today. The remains of the Reich Chancellery were actually, for a brief period, a bit of a tourist attraction in Berlin, only for a couple of years, because by 1947, the Soviets just cleared them completely. And actually, this area remained empty for quite a long time. It was part of the border between East Berlin over here and West Berlin over here, and it was all tightly controlled by the East Germans. But in the 80s, they decided to make some changes and give us these apartments that you see right here. So, that's it. 4 homes for Adolf Hitler, all of them gone. All right, I hope you enjoyed that, found that interesting or useful or whatever, educational, I don't know. It's the first in a series of videos I'm going to call Where the Lived, and I thought you've got to start with the big one, the obvious one, because everyone's going to ask otherwise. But actually with this series, I'd like to go into a few names that I would guess your average non-history nerd person has never heard of. So make sure that you subscribe for that. And again, liking, subscribing, commenting, that all helps me reach more people, which is going to help me actually get paid to make this stuff, which means I can make even more of them for you as well. I've got big plans. I'd like to work with editors and animators to make these videos really something special, but there's only so much I can do alone. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.